Now that it's autumn, I've been doing a lot of research about pasture management so I can be prepared for the springtime and go ahead and get the supplies I need and the tools I need. And I thought I would share this video with you all about what I've learned and about what you can do to start prepping your horse pastures just so your horses are healthier, your grass is healthier. We only have 4 acres here and we have 2.5 horses and a sheep. So we have a lot of animals on our land, and so we have to be very strategic in the management of our pastures. If you're interested in owning a horse farm one day, hopefully this video can inspire you as well. A big part of managing your pastures and keeping them healthy is managing your horse's manure. Manure can act as great fertilizer. It returns nitrogen back to the soil. The only downside to that is sometimes too much of a good thing can actually be a bad thing. So if you have piles of poop all throughout your pasture, that's actually too much nitrogen for the soil and it can start killing off the grass. If you see this area, the grass is starting to die and it's really patchy. So there was a bunch of manure that I had cleaned up here yesterday. Not to mention, if your pastures or your pens or your stalls are filled with manure, that can be really unhealthy for your horses. To get the best of both worlds, to where you're eliminating piles of manure out in your field, but then you're also spreading the manure and thinning it out to where it can actively fertilize your pasture, the best thing to do is to spread the manure. So this video today is sponsored by Conestoga Manure Spreaders. Smeagol, don't get in there. Right here we have their CM25 model that can fit, I think, 25 cubic feet of manure. At Conestoga, they're just really passionate about helping you manage your pastures and your farm. This model here is the recommended amount for up to 5 horses. And so if you give them a call and you tell them how many horses they have, they'll be like, okay, you need to check out this model because this would help you manage the amount of manure your horses are producing. If your horses are staying in stalls or in pens, kind of like Yoshi and Daisy are, manure piles up quick. And so a manure spreader can also really help you manage like your manure pile. And Conestoga makes different models for what you have. So since we don't have a tractor, this model is solely driven by the movement will get this thing to start churning. But if you have like a tractor, they have ones that have PTO shafts that you can get. All right, so now we're good to go. I'm gonna hop up here. You can see just how fine the Conestoga manure spreader turns this up and spreads it out to where it actually becomes a useful fertilizer. Horse manure is actually very corrosive, and so when you're looking for a manure spreader, it's important to find one that can stand up to the poop. Something that Conestoga does with their manure spreaders is they use materials that are supposed to stand up against corrosion. So this black lining is an option you can get to put in your manure spreader and just protect it. And then also their chains are made out of a special metal that will stand up against corrosion as well. If this manure spreader is something you're interested in and you think it could help you, go check out ConestogaManureSpreaders.com. The link is in the description. Thank you so much to them also for sponsoring this video. One of the best ways you can help your pastures is by rotating your fields. So what this means is ideally you have multiple fields. The animals are in one pasture for a while the other one rests, and then you switch them to where they go on the other pasture and you let the other pasture rest. The reason this is important is because you give your pasture and your grass time to recover from the stress of having livestock on it, and then also gives it time to regrow. Horses are notoriously hard on pastures. So for example, you see this dirt patch that I'm standing on? My horses love to stand right here when they're down in this field. So you can look down here and just see how hard the ground has been packed down by their feet. And I put grass seed here, but it didn't grow just because the ground is so hard. Taking your horses off of the pasture and giving it time to rest and recover, that will help eliminate some of these patchy spots that you may see. If you'll notice how low the grass is right here, so this area has been grazed by the horses and it's time to give it a rest. Horses and sheep for that matter, they like to eat the grass down to like the roots. That's very unhealthy for the grass. Grass likes to store its energy closer to the ground, and so when it gets close to the ground and the horses keep eating it, it's really unhealthy for the grass. What I have seen, although I know sometimes it's impossible to stick to this standard, but when your grass is at 2 inches, that's when you need to rotate your horses off and let the grass grow back up. So as you can see here, I'm pretty sure we're lower than 2 inches, and you know, sometimes it's not going to be perfect, especially when you're on a small farm. You may have to deal with these problems, especially in the winter when the grass has stopped growing. Usually by the end of winter, all my grass will be really low. But that's why it's important come springtime, I start rotating the fields so that the grass can grow back up and get healthy again. Since we do only have 4 acres, we're trying to make every space usable. We had this really big field that wasn't fenced in, and so we're starting the process of fencing it in so it can become Yoshi and Daisy's pasture. And the reason for that is with the other horses, I just don't want them running around in here. There's some hazards, like there's a bank to what used to be a vegetable garden. There's a bank down to that fence there that's really steep. And then these trees behind me, we think they're cherry trees, which are poisonous to livestock, so we're gonna need to cut them down before we can actually use this field. The last thing we need to do is just finish our fence line down and connect it to our other fencing. So once we're done with this field, I'll really have 3 pastures that I can rotate between for Daisy and Yoshi, and then I'll even be able to use one of those other pastures for the bigger horses. One of our big projects that we have for this winter or the springtime is splitting our main pasture. So our main pasture is probably, I don't know, like 2.5, 3 acres, but it's not split right now. And this is where the big horses live, and they live out here all year round. So we haven't been able to rotate it just because we don't have another space to put them. As you can see behind me and to the sides, we just have a lot of weeds growing up and foxtail. And so I want to get that all under control, but it will be much easier to do it when I can rotate the horses and have the horses not out here. Putting up fencing can be really expensive. So I know that may put some people off to rotating their pastures. But one thing you can do is you can look at electric fencing. That's usually much cheaper than putting up like a 4-board wooden fence. Or even behind me, I have T-posts and I have a welded wire fence with an electric wire at the top. Even that was like super easy and super quick to put up, and it was much cheaper than a wooden fence. Another huge aspect of pasture management is weed control. So controlling weeds in a horse pasture is a little bit difficult because you can't really use weed killer in a horse pasture because that's poisonous to horses. Something that happened with us is the first summer when we moved here, there was no weeds in the pastures. But by this previous summer we just went through, there's weeds all throughout the pastures. And so I was like, what is going on? And I really started to research so that I could have a plan going in this spring. As we mentioned before, manure can have a positive and a negative effect on your pasture, depending on what you do with it. So if manure is just left to sit out in the pasture in piles and it will kill the grass, weeds take advantage of patchy areas and they will grow up in those areas. And so one thing you want to do is control the manure. Apart from that, another thing you can do is overseed your fields. So in the spring and in the fall, you can add more grass seed down in your pastures to fill up those patchy areas and help grass grow instead of weeds. Another thing that can really help with weed control is mowing your fields in the spring and summer. When weeds get to a certain height, they produce seeds and they'll spread their seeds. So when you mow your grass, you're cutting off the head of the weed to where it can't spread its seeds. Hi, little boy. And so that's a really important part of controlling weeds. Another aspect to that is if you mow, then your grass is kind of staying higher than the weed, and that will deter the weed from growing. If you are living on a small farm, just remember that a manure spreader can be very beneficial to your operation. So once again, check out Conestoga manure spreaders. The link is in the description. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more weekly horse videos.